Welcome to Gastown, Indiana, home of the Bottomless pit. Copyright, 2024 by Ace Donovan, Brock Edwards, Mickey Stone. Published and distributed by HoosierHorrorStories.com. This book is a work of fiction. Any references to historical events, real people or real places are used fictitiously. Other names, characters, places and events are products of the author's imaginations, and any resemblance to actual events or places or persons, living or dead, is entirely coincidental. Unauthorized reproduction or distribution without the expressed written consent of Ace Donovan or Brock Edwards or Mickey Stone is strictly prohibited. Bible scriptures in this book are from the King James Version. Introduction. Andrew Faulkner lay dead on a stage. Faulkner's throat was slit from ear to ear, murdered by a confidante. Gastown is an explosive look at the potential power of a one-world government. Andrew Faulkner is a businessman who can revitalize dying communities, but is he just a businessman? What if Andrew Faulkner is more than that? What if the global elites are helping support the Antichrist? Gastown is a new story of the Rapture. What if everything that seems good is bad? Daryl Evans, an investigative reporter, begins to have suspicions, and when half the world's population is missing, he begins an investigative reporting that shakes him to the bone. Grab Gastown today. Chapter 1: The Gastown Gazette. Daryl, Joe Myers yelled into the newsroom of the Gastown Gazette. It was bustling today. Today was the day of the big press conference. This wasn't just a big press conference for Gastown. This was a press conference that attracted the attention of every major outlet in Indiana. This was the biggest news in Gastown since the 70s and 80s, when Friday night meant sold-out high school gymnasiums. Not just gymnasiums but fieldhouses. Fieldhouses that even colleges would envy. From the Chrysler Fieldhouse in Newcastle to the Walnut Street Fieldhouse in Muncie to the hallowed halls of the Wigwam in Gastown. All three fieldhouses seat more than 8,000 people and would still have standing room only on Fridays. Gastown needed some good news. It was no longer growing, it was stagnant. The major industry in the town was Messina Motors. They were experts in producing anything needed for the internal motors of the three major automobile manufacturers. The big three, though, was moving manufacturing south, and Messina Motors was no different. They too wanted to move south. Gastown had grown due to the natural gas being found there at the turn of the century. But that was a century ago. Gastown was dependent on Messina Motors. The money that the factory pumped into the economy couldn't properly be measured. There were 20,000 employees working round the clock, 7 days a week. Those people bought groceries, ate at fast food restaurants, bought gas for their vehicles. The community needed Messina Motors, but it had begun the move south of the border thanks to the North American Free Trade Agreement, more commonly referred to as NAFTA. Cheaper labor means more profits. Daryl, Joe Myers yelled again. This time he was standing in the doorway. Daryl Evans. Get your hind parts in my office. Daryl Evans was a star reporter for the Gastown Gazette. Evans had written for the Washington Post, but he had made some mistakes and found himself in the middle of Indiana trying to make it back to the top. He was in the process of writing a novel of his experiences in Washington, D.C. He missed the big stories on Capitol Hill. In Gastown, it was man bites dog stories. Evans, Joe Myers was yelling louder. Yes, Joe, good Lord, let me get my morning coffee, Daryl said as he continued to stir in the Irish cream in his coffee. He double-timed to Joe's office. What is so important, Joe? Daryl asked. I need you to do that story at the courthouse today. Earl can't make it. The moron fell down the stairs of his apartment and might have broken his leg. He is over at Gastown General Hospital, Joe explained. Come on, Joe. You know me and Mayor Brock get along like midnight tacos on a 70-year-old colon, Daryl said. I don't care if you are eating midnight tacos or drinking noon mimosas. You are my best reporter, and this is the biggest story in a decade. Gastown will never be the same after today, Joe said. Daggone it, Joe. I will go. I sure as hell don't want to, Daryl added. I don't think I asked permission to assign you the story, Joe said, and you got 15 minutes to get there. They are holding the press conference on the steps. You just got to walk across the street, and it is a beautiful spring morning. Now shake your tail feathers and get there. Chapter 2: The Press Conference. Daryl grabbed his tape recorder and stenographer pad, shoved them in a satchel, and slung the satchel over his shoulder. Joe was right, the spring morning was beautiful. Of course, it was Indiana, and Daryl thought it could snow by nightfall. He really hated Indiana. Mayor Walter Brock stepped up to the podium and adjusted the microphone and began to speak. Perfect, Daryl thought. I got to stand on the steps looking up at Mayor Brock. The mayor liked that everyone had to be below him. What a prick, Daryl thought. We are here today to celebrate the greatest event in the history of Gastown. Quite possibly in the history of our great state of Indiana. Why stop there? What we are going to announce today will change the United States, the mayor boasted. Daryl rolled his eyes. Today we partner with Mr. Andrew Faulkner in Refluxi Industry. Mr. Faulkner is going to help Gastown to revitalize. He will personally ensure that at least 10,000 people will be employed in the construction of Faulkner Park. The area of the Weiss River Canal will be completely reimagined. No longer will it be just a dirty river running through Gastown. It will be restructured into a man-made lake that can rival Lake Tahoe. It will be a 12-square-mile area complete with a new baseball stadium and 3 riverboats. 2 of the riverboats will be floating casinos and 1 will be an entertainment riverboat. It will be a feature of cabaret that will celebrate the LGBTQ community. Gastown will be a haven for all people. This will make Gastown the destination of tourists for years. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Mr. Andrew Faulkner, the mayor said. You got to be kidding, Daryl said to himself under his breath. A lake, a ballpark, casinos? Mr. Andrew Faulkner replaced the mayor at the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today. We at Refluxi Industries are so excited to announce that we have chosen Gastown to build into the greatest city in the Midwest. We will be larger and better than Chicago, Detroit, Cincinnati, and Indianapolis combined. We are going to renovate the land that already exists known as Millbrook Mall. That will become Faulkner Park. A state-of-the-art, Major League Baseball stadium with retractable roof. It will be on a literal island. You will have the option to ride one of our riverboats to the stadium or drive your own boat. It will be different from anything that has even been attempted in the United States. Imagine the stadium in Minneapolis mixed with a stadium in San Francisco. Gastown will quickly become the place to visit and the place to live. Daryl couldn't believe what he was hearing. Daryl was a longtime baseball fan. He was a diehard Cubby backer. There was no way Major League Baseball was going to allow Gastown to have a Major League Baseball team this close to Chicago, Detroit, and Cincinnati. And just how much was this going to cost? Bob Murray, the spokesman for the city of Gastown, walked to the podium. Thanks again to all of you for being here. We are going to open the floor, steps for questions for Mayor Brock or Mr. Faulkner. Reporters held up their hands as Daryl sat dumbfounded. Bob Murray pointed at a young blonde from one of the F.T. Wayne television stands. What is the estimated cost of this? The blonde asked. Andrew Faulkner spoke. We expect the total cost to be near $3 billion. Refluxi Industries will be providing 70% of those costs and will employ 100% of the laborers. Another reporter quickly stood and asked, that leaves nearly $1 billion. Who will pay that? Mayor Brock then stepped beside Faulkner. The remaining $1 billion will be paid through a tax initiative. It is a small price to pay for what will generate tens of billions of dollars. Daryl could no longer hold his tongue. Daryl Evans of the Gastown Gazette. Mayor Brock spoke again. Yes, Mr. Evans, everyone knows who you are. This question is for either of you. What makes you think you can get a Major League Baseball team here in Gastown with Chicago and Cincinnati so close? Mr. Faulkner stared intently at Daryl. Mr. Evans, is it? Daryl nodded. I intend on purchasing either the Cubs, Reds, or White Sox. I am already in negotiations with the Reds, and I hope to acquire them by next week. If I can't, I will buy the Cubs. Someone will say yes. Daryl just couldn't believe what he was hearing. The reporters and the crowd seemed to be so excited, darn near giddy, he thought. Daryl just couldn't see how any of this could be true or good for that matter. Redirecting the flow of the Weiss River to become a lake that would rival those of the Great Lakes? Lake Tahoe? He just didn't think this could be accurate. All the reporters received artists' renderings of the ballpark and Lake Weiss. He took all the information and went back to the Gastown Gazette offices and wrote his story. It would be front-page news. He finished the story and hit send. He walked into Joe's office. "That was a load of horse crap," Daryl said to Joe. "There is no way this works. A man-made lake? Large enough to hold riverboats and all this stuff, ridiculous. We don't make the news, Daryl, we report it," Joe said as he grabbed a light jacket and slipped it over his big belly. "Thanks for doing the story, Daryl." Daryl nodded his head. He went out to his cubicle and sat down. He drank some lukewarm coffee. He really wanted out of this crappy town. Chapter 3: Everyone Needs Somebody. Daryl was awakened by the smell of bacon. He blinked his eyes and then slid into a pair of house slippers and walked into the kitchen. "You cook," he said to the shapely blonde at the stove. "What kind of question is that? Do I cook? My mother and grandmother are amazing cooks. I'm okay. It is just pancakes and bacon," she said. "Well, it smells amazing," Daryl said as he leaned in and kissed the blonde on the cheek. Daryl and Holly May had been an item for almost 2 years now. Holly is a news reporter for the local CBS affiliate in Indianapolis. "When did you get here?" "I came in last night. I have an interview with Andrew Faulkner today," Holly said. "The new Wizard of Gastown." "Don't look behind the curtain," Daryl said. "I take it that you don't see value in what Faulkner is doing," Holly stated. "Something just seemed off. He has a creepy vibe to him. Just that slimy kinda real estate investor guy. I just don't see how he is going to do it. You know, the whole flood the Weiss River into the mall area. Just seems far-fetched," Daryl added. "I read your article in the paper this morning. You didn't sound skeptical in the article. You sounded like a company guy," Holly said. "The Gastown Gazette doesn't pay me to be a real journalist," Daryl said. "They pay me to report the facts. I presented the facts as they were presented in the press conference." "Quit it. You were nominated for a Pulitzer. You are an amazing journalist and an amazing lova," Holly May said with a laugh. "I was nominated twice," Daryl said. Holly May smiled as she served a stack of pancakes and bacon to Daryl. "There he is. That is the Daryl Evans I love," she said as she kissed Daryl. Daryl and Holly met near the end of the pandemic. They were working on different stories and found themselves in a microbrewery in D.C. Holly was doing a story on families meeting via Zoom and Daryl was doing a 4-part expose on the impact that the pandemic had on the mental health of citizens. They were very different approaches for the same event. Holly was focusing on how people were making the best of a bad situation while Daryl was focusing on how the pandemic was dividing a country. It was the typical type of impactful reporting that Daryl was known for in his career. The 4-part series got Daryl nominated for a Pulitzer. He had been nominated 5 years prior to that for a 5-part series on a different pandemic. One based on drug usage. Daryl implied that the government was helping protect the drug runners from South America. Daryl was making many enemies in D.C. among the government officials. When Daryl and Holly met, there was an immediate attraction even though Daryl was 12 years older than Holly. Holly was now 28 and Daryl had recently turned 40. Holly's cameraman Buck Reynolds knew Daryl for years and introduced the two of them. They sat together into the night, and when "Yeah" by Usher came on the jukebox, Holly said for Daryl to get up and dance with her. He couldn't resist. Holly was surprised at how well Daryl could dance, and they did so all night. A week later they were beginning their relationship. Once Daryl had his career destroyed in D.C., he followed Holly to Indianapolis. He finally got his current gig in Gastown after months of trying to find jobs near Indy. Holly stayed with Daryl as she believed in him. He was busted by an undercover cop for possession of marijuana. The undercover cop claimed that Daryl was trying to sell the marijuana. Once the police in D.C. got themselves a search warrant and searched Daryl's car, a significant amount of cocaine was found in the trunk. Daryl knew it had to be planted, and so did Holly, but the damage was done. Daryl's reputation was tarnished. He eventually pled guilty to a misdemeanor of possession of marijuana. Reports of the plea agreement was never broadcast. The people who wanted Daryl ruined had accomplished their goal. Daryl had been picking up pieces ever since. Holly has tried to convince Daryl to propose marriage for more than a year, but Daryl was afraid the relationship would ruin Holly's skyrocketing career. She has interviewed in Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York all this month. Her good looks and ability present the news with a good delivery, and she was a true up-and-comer. "Have you heard back from any of your interviews?" Daryl asked as he began cleaning up from breakfast. "My agent says I should hear back next week," she said. "So, which one do you want?" Daryl asked. "The one that pays the most, of course," she said with a wink. "Of course," Daryl responded with a laugh. "It won't be long before you have the pick of jobs. You are sensational. And thanks for breakfast." "So am I marriage material, now that you know I actually cook," Holly said. "I told you being Mr. Holly Rochelle, her air name, isn't one of my goals," Daryl added. "I don't have to marry you to tell people that I love you and that you are the most important person in the world to me," Daryl said. "Oh please, you are a Pulitzer nominee. You will always be Daryl Evans," Holly said. "So, you are going to change your name to Holly Evans?" Daryl said with a dose of sarcasm. "Well, not professionally, but in my personal life I will be Mrs. Holly Rochelle Evans." "I would be so proud to have that name," she said. Daryl didn't comment. "When is your meeting with Faulkner?" "Noon," Holly said. "Buck is going to pick me up and take me to the courthouse. I am sure my buddy, Mayor Brock, will be there." "Make sure you blow him kisses," Daryl said with a laugh. "What is it with you and the mayor?" Holly asked. "He is an asshole. That's all," Daryl said as he raised his eyebrows. "I think I am going to go to the office today and do some searching into the background of our savior, Mr. Faulkner. I will have Buck drop me off there after the interview." "Will that be okay?" she asked. "You already know," Daryl said. Chapter 4: Meeting Andrew Faulkner. "Come on in, Miss Rochelle," the voice said. Holly May entered and looked around the mayor's office. She had never been inside the inner sanctum of Gastown politics. She typically focused on news in the state's capital of Indianapolis. Unless, of course, the big story was outside of Indianapolis. And this is a big story. Buck began putting the cameras in place. He sat one up to get looks at Faulkner and the mayor and one to get Holly's reactions. The mayor, Faulkner, Holly, and Buck made small talk as they prepared for the interview. Holly always felt it was best to get the interviewee to become relaxed before the real questions begin. After about 45 minutes, it was time for the interview to begin. "Mr. Faulkner, I think the thing that most people want to know is simple. Who is Andrew Faulkner?" Holly began the interview. "He is kind, he is industrious. He is a man who wants to get things done," Faulkner replied. "I think that is a given. But the real question is what drives you? What makes Andrew Faulkner the success that he is?" Holly asked. "I am driven by success. That makes the two inseparable. I drive for success. So, to me, one comes with the other," he concluded. "For those who haven't followed your career, where did Andrew Faulkner come from?" Holly inquired. Faulkner smiled and crossed his legs. "I was born in Turkey. My mother is American and my father a native man of Turkey. They thought it best if I was raised here in America, so my mother brought me to the States. My father stayed in Turkey. He flies in once a week to see me. My mother lives in New Jersey. I live on Staten Island. But I have places in Jamaica, Turkey, and Switzerland. I have my business interests in many places." "Why Gastown? I think everyone has that question," Holly said. Faulkner adjusted his tie and ran his fingers down the tie, a power move. "I wanted a spot in the Midwest. It seemed the perfect place. People in the Midwest are open to development and can get excited about new ideas and advancements. Some might say, They can be easily persuaded on the outside but not at all convinced on the inside. Midwesterners are very astute people, and I think many have a lot of doubts about what you have proposed. It seems, forgive me, but a bit of an adventure and folly. There was the zinger that Holly hoped to land. Faulkner paused and gave a deep glare to Holly. She felt the blow landed, but true to form, Faulkner recovered. I don't begin adventures with failure in mind. I also don't fail. I'm not a pretend success like Donald Trump or Mark Zuckerberg. I am a real success. This will work. Miss Rochelle, you can count on it. Holly felt a chill. There was something deeply creepy about the way Faulkner looked at her. She turned her attention to the mayor. Mayor, how did you become involved with Mr. Faulkner? One of the board members from Ferlusi Industries contacted me about developmental ideas for Gastown. I was immediately impressed by the proposals. Several meetings later and we had a plan, the mayor said. The mayor seems so small town compared to the Armani suit worn by Faulkner. Did you consider the cost of the project for the people of Gastown? The mayor stammered before finding his words. Well, the cost that will be paid by the people will be far worth the suspected profits of the project for Gastown and even Indiana. Are you sure? It is $1 billion investment in taxes for the people, Holly said. Faulkner interrupted for the stammering mayor, who clearly couldn't take the blows landed by Holly. The investment through taxes will be spread out over a series of years. It can be recouped by the number of visitors and those who will be attending the games and riverboats. The jobs created and the economic stimulus coming into Gastown will be unduplicated in Indiana. Think of it, the Las Vegas of the Midwest, only this one will be a liquid Las Vegas. It will be amazing, better than an amusement park mixed with an all-star weekend. Well, I thank you both for your time, Holly said. And clear, Buck said as he turned off the camera. Thank you both very much, Holly said as she shook hands with both Faulkner and the mayor. Miss Rochelle, it was a pleasure, Faulkner said. I'm right, Miss Rochelle, the mayor added. Would you like to have supper, Miss Rochelle? Maybe you can learn more about me, Faulkner said. I will let you know, Mr. Faulkner, Holly said as she looked at Buck, and Buck responded by rolling his eyes. Chapter 5, More on Faulkner. Holly walked into the cubicle occupied by Daryl and leaned in and kissed Daryl on the cheek. Hi babe, she said. Hey, girl, sit down and tell me about the fella known as Andrew Faulkner, Daryl said as if he knew something that others didn't. Why do I feel like you are the cat that caught the early worm, Holly said. What the heck did you just say, Daryl said. You know what I mean, Holly said. As far as Faulkner goes, he is really smooth. He barely shows cracks, and I gave him my best shot. Got him comfortable and then bitch slapped him. He barely showed the connect. Are you sure that you landed the punch, Daryl said. Oh, it landed. He gave me a solid death glare and then gave a well-thought-out answer, Holly said. That doesn't surprise me. I've been deep diving on your boy Faulkner, Daryl said. Oh, my boy, Faulkner, Holly said with a laugh. He chose you, I'm sure, Daryl said. Anyway, what did he say about his developments? He said that he always succeeds. It is hard to argue that he doesn't. He has made a crapload of money and he doesn't fail. Just look at his track record, Holly said. Exactly, but he leaves a disaster in his wake. Look at his new NBA stadium in Pittsburgh. The team is having great success. The stadium is a boom. He is making record television and radio money. Seems like the best it can be, right? Daryl said. Why do I feel like there is a but coming, like a giant but? Holly said. A but the size of the collective Kardashians. Everywhere that Faulkner invests turns up gold. He is literally a King Midas. However, the areas surrounding his investments eventually become drug and gang infested. In fact, now in its 5th season, the Pittsburgh Condors can't sign free agents. The players don't want to live anywhere near the downtown area. They don't think it is safe, and I have found that it is the case everywhere Mr. Midas spins his money web. Wow, you have been busy, Holly said. Well, my boy Faulkner, as you call him, invited me to supper. Maybe it would a date that I should keep, Holly said. Maybe I will join you, Daryl said. You can't be there, Holly said. Not in person, anyway. I have an idea, Daryl said. Chapter 6 Dinner with Faulkner. Holly sat the pen down at the edge of her notebook just as Daryl said. Daryl had a pen that had a microphone. The pen was directly tied to Daryl's computer. It could be downloaded as well so the conversation could be kept forever if needed. Daryl told Holly to just tell Andrew Faulkner that she was going to be taking notes of their conversation. Daryl also told Holly to make sure that she didn't spin the pen around in her hand and do not click the pen as nervous people do, it would alter the sound. Miss Rochelle, why the notepad and pen? Andrew Faulkner quickly had zeroed in on Holly's plan. Daryl had told Holly that this would likely happen and that it would play into their plans. I was just wanted to make sure I got any facts right. I wouldn't want to misquote you, Mr. Faulkner, Holly said. I thought this dinner was off the record, Faulkner said as he poured each of them a glass of wine. As you know, Mr. Faulkner, a conversation with a reporter is never off the record, Holly said as she took a sip of wine. Faulkner nodded. I would prefer that we not take notes. You are an intelligent and beautiful reporter, you will remember tonight. Holly felt a chill go up her spine. There it was, it always seems that Faulkner says something that just feels creepy. There was just something about Faulkner. She could not quite put a finger on what it was, but there was something about him. Is the waiter going to come by and take our order? I am famished. I took the liberty of ordering for the two of us. Apparently, the prime rib is the specialty here at the Gastown steakhouse. A side salad for both of us. I hope this is okay, Faulkner said. Oh sure, perfect gentleman, Holly said. Daryl groaned as he sat at the computer and listened to the conversation. He grunted, perfect gentleman, blah, blah, blah. So, Mr. Faulkner, now that we are quote/unquote off the record, why Gastown? What am I missing? Holly asked. If you look into my investments, I love the Midwest. I have the NBA team in Pittsburgh, and I am getting ready to move the Los Angeles Rams back to St. Louis where they belong, he said as Holly interrupted. But didn't they just build that enormous SoFi Stadium in LA for the Rams and Chargers? Why would they move? Holly inquired. They would still have the Chargers and quite frankly, Miss Rochelle, money talks. You know, to quote Brian Johnson and AC/DC, Faulkner said with a sly smile. You think you can make that happen? Holly said. Think? I never think, I can do anything. I do things, I don't just think about them, Faulkner said with a neat snarl. Oh, I see. A confident man, Holly said as she finished her salad. Daryl groaned with a clear snarl. I also just purchased Apex Films. I am moving it to Chicago. It gets it out of that cesspool of Hollywood and brings it to the Midwest. Everyone loves Chicago, Faulkner said. Wow, Apex just produced the last 2 Oscar winners, Holly said. Why the Midwest? Why your fascination with the Midwest? People in the Midwest understand the value of money. They are hard-working people, a blue-collar bunch. That is more my type of person. I am a self-made man. I am a blue-collar man who just happened to become a rich white-collar guy, he said with a smirk. Some might say the people of the Midwest are gullible and easily influenced. They are a Bible Belt group. They believe in the fairy tale of Jesus. That would allow you to sell them another fairy tale. A floating Las Vegas, Holly said. She took a bite of prime rib and felt it hard to swallow as she knew she was saying things that made her stomach turn. It wasn't at all the real way she felt. Daryl took a big breath. Wow, Holly, well done, he said to himself. Faulkner tilted his head and spoke cautiously, what I believe is inconsequential. Which brings me to why we are meeting, he said as he dabbed at the corner of his lips as he finished his prime rib. I need a media liaison. Someone to help me with the media here in the Midwest. Someone well respected. Someone with a demanding personality. Someone who clearly is attractive and can control the camera. I need someone like you. Mr. Faulkner, I have no interest. I am a reporter, not a media liaison, Holly said. I am prepared to triple your salary, Faulkner said. Then he crossed his legs and straightened his tie. Triple? That would be $210,000, Holly said. Oh, I see. Let's just round it up then to $250,000. My lawyer can write up a 2-year contract. That is $500,000, Miss Rochelle. I think after that 2 years that you will be convinced to sign up for longer, Faulkner said. That is very generous, Mr. Faulkner, Holly said. Damn right, Daryl thought. Don't close the deal yet, Holly. Be smart here. This is not something I can just jump at. I need time to consider it, Holly said. What is there to consider? $500,000 in 2 years or $140,000 in 2 years. You will be flying all over the world. I can assure you, Miss Rochelle, this is purely business. I have no romantic interest in you. Besides, I believe you already have a boyfriend. Ah, Mr. Evans, I think, Faulkner said. Shit. Daryl said as he slapped the computer table. Careful, Holly. I think 48 hours would suffice. I would expect an answer by Monday morning. I will send the contract to 11152, Southeast Michigan Drive there in Indianapolis. I believe that is your house. A courier will be there Monday at 10:30 a.m. You will have until noon to sign that contract. Fair, Faulkner said. Holly paused as the waiter was removing the last of the dirty plates from the table. Anything else, Mr. Faulkner? He asked. No thank you, Jeremy. You did a fantastic job, he said as Faulkner shook the hand of Jeremy and slipped a $100 bill in his hand. Fair, Holly said. Do you need a ride? Faulkner said. I can have my driver drop you off. I am good actually. My car is across the street, Holly said. Faulkner rose and walked around to where Holly was sitting and slid the chair back for Holly. He helped her with her coat. Good night, Miss Rochelle. I hope to be in touch on Tuesday morning. Chapter 7. What's next? Holly Mae walked up behind, put her hands over Daryl Evans' eyes and leaned in and kissed Daryl on the cheek. How did I do? She asked Daryl. I thought you did outstanding. You were tough when you needed to be, and you reeled him in when you needed to. Great job. Question is, now where do we go from here? Daryl said. What do you think? That is a lot of money, but if he is as bad as he appears to be, it is blood money, Holly said. Well, that is a little dramatic. Blood money? Come on, blood money. I'm not saying he is an even remotely nice guy, but blood money is extreme, Daryl said. Think about it. He pretends to be lifting a community out of depression and really, he destroys them. You said that yourself, Holly said. That is a good point, touché, indeed. Do you believe him that it isn't sexual? Daryl asked. I have no idea. I was going to ask you the same thing. I know one thing, he is so creepy, she said. Give me a lowdown, help me understand. What do you mean creepy? Trust me, I think he is a sleazy guy. Hell, I think he is an arrogant prick. I think he steps on anyone he must just to get what he wants. I think he needs to be admired and I am sure he is not used to hearing anyone turn him down. I think we need to evaluate. What if you say no? Does he sweeten the deal? There is an obvious advantage to accepting the advantage, he said. And just what is that advantage? She asked. He smiled, clearly the old adage, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Good grief, Holly said with a small chuckle, that is so goofy. Why would I want him close? I told you, he is creepy. For the same reason that you had supper with him tonight. You get an inside look. It gives you a true inside look at the creepy kingdom, he said laughing. I am serious, he is creepy, she said. I know, babe. I know. But I don't think you would be in danger. I think you must be careful. Close but distant. Continue to push him. See how he deals with it. If it seems to be too chancy to question him, then you become a yes man, he said. I don't know if I can do that, Holly added. I understand, but hopefully by that point, we either know that he is all on the up and up or we try to take him down. He could really be on the up and just be a sleazy investor. Think about it, there are plenty of sleazy investors. I do think there might be an advantage to making him negotiate. I don't think we want you to appear to be too eager. You pushed him in the dinner, now you can continue to be that tough female, he said. Like what? More money? It is $500,000. How do I negotiate that? Holly said. I'm not sure you push for more money. I think you push for less time. Say, you ask for a 1-year deal. More APY, less commitment. Maybe $300K for 1 year. Explain to him that you can accomplish what he wants done in a year. If he pushes for 18 months, then you agree, Daryl said. Holly propped her legs onto Daryl's lap. I think we have a plan. Daryl slipped Holly's high-heel shoes off and began to rub her feet. I believe we do. You good with this? Holly smiled and nodded yes as Daryl's cell phone rang. Both Daryl and Holly looked at the caller ID on Daryl's phone, restricted. What the heck? Hello? Oh, it's you, Daryl said. Holly raised her eyebrows as if to ask who. Daryl grabbed his pen and wrote on a notepad, "ITS the Ghost." Holly's jaw dropped in awe. Chapter 8, The Contract. Daryl Evans recognized the number when his cell phone rang. He had anticipated a call from Holly May since he got to work this morning. Good morning, Daryl Evans, may I help you? Hey babe, said the voice on the other end. It was Holly, of course. I got it. The contract offer from Faulkner, he said. Implying that he knew the answer. Yes. It came via a courier just as Faulkner said it would. He included a letter. It appears he sensed my insecurity at the contract offer, so he amended it for me, she says. Read me the letter, Daryl told her. Greetings, Miss Rochelle. I sensed your apprehension at the offer we discussed on Friday, so I sent you an offer that I think will more to your liking. I am offering a 6-month contract at $100,000. The contract will then renew every 2 months at $20,000. The renewal must be agreed by both parties. In addition to the value of the contract, the employee will qualify for 50 shares of Ferlusi Industries for each renewal. The value of said stock is currently trading at $148.69, which values at $7,434.50. The stocks will be the property of the employee even after the termination of the employee, whether at the decision of the employee or the employer. Please see the enclosed contract and sign and return via courier, who will transfer the contract to Ferlusi Industries located in Chicago. Congratulations and thank you for considering Ferlusi Industries. Regards, Andrew Faulkner. Interesting, Daryl said. What do you think? Just because he amended the contract doesn't make me feel any better about it, Holly said. Basically, he reduced the value of real money in the contract and covered the $50,000 difference in stocks. Very interesting negotiation technique. He knows his art, does he not? Daryl said. I suppose he is very aware of what he is doing, but I am looking for advice, babe. What do you think I should do? Holly said. Sign it. You have the pen and I have a couple of other gadgets that were given to me by the ghost. You will be safe. After 6 months, we reevaluate, agreed, Daryl said. Holly took a big breath. You are sure? I am not going to let anything happen to you, Holly. I love you, Daryl said. Chapter 9, Working for Faulkner. Holly May had been an official employee for Ferlusi Industries for over 30 days. Mainly she organized press conferences and helped sit in on big meetings. She would then write the press release and even do sound cuts and send them to all media outlets. She had become a press agent for a person that she didn't feel deserves a person of her ability, influence, and skill set. The worst part, she hadn't influenced anything that resembled impropriety. It was frustrating. Today, her boss, Andrew Faulkner, was meeting with Les Jorgensen, the CEO of Messina Motors. She was intrigued. You are going to want to take notes today, Faulkner told Holly. The meeting took place at the Ferlusi Industries in Chicago. Jorgensen and two other representatives from Messina Motors took their place one side of a conference table, and Holly, Faulkner, and Faulkner's right-hand man Lloyd Raymond. There were donuts, coffee, and water for the non-caffeine drinkers. After a few minutes of exchanges of pleasantries, Faulkner began the conversation. "Mr. Jorgensen, I don't plan to beat around the bush here. I need Messina Motors to raise the wages of its employees," Faulkner said. Holly was shocked at what she was hearing. Did Faulkner really represent the common man in this discussion? "Mr. Faulkner, why exactly would I do that? I have a $30 million offer to move the rest of the plant to Mexico. Why would I possibly raise wages? I want to close all the plants," Jorgensen responded. "I understand. But hear me out, it would be best for the development of the new Gastown if Messina Motors was thriving and its employees would have a little extra cash to use at the new ballpark and the casino." "You see my point, Mr. Jorgensen," Faulkner explained. Jorgensen huffed a bit. "And what is in it for me, Mr. Faulkner? What would you say to 15% interest in the riverboat industry? The plan is to get as many people participating in the riverboats as possible. Imagine, people win money and buy cars, which helps your industry. If they lose money, then you still win. You get an advantage in either way. It is truly a win-win," Faulkner said. "You mean if we can get people addicted to gambling, then we both get rich," Jorgensen said. "Tomato, tomato," Faulkner said. "I like your style, Faulkner," Jorgensen said. And there it was, Holly thought. The first crack in the shield of Faulkner. This is probably how the areas around his ballpark end up being run down. He knows what he is doing. Faulkner spoke again. "This is off the record, Miss Rochelle. I think we can set up some other businesses, Mr. Jorgensen. I have some people that specialize in addiction. This is going to be a great relationship, Mr. Jorgensen." The negotiations went from there. Holly had her pen lying on the table the whole time. "Holy crap," Daryl said to himself. "He is literally talking about running drugs and who knows what else. By the way, Mr. Jorgensen, once we get the people loving their life of gambling, then you go to Mexico, and you still get $30 million. Truly a win-win." Jorgensen could barely contain himself. "I believe we have an understanding, Mr. Faulkner." "Indeed, we do, Mr. Jorgensen," Faulkner said. Chapter 10 No Suspicions? Over the next 6 months, Holly May kept an eye open and an ear to the door, so to speak, to try and identify any chink in the armor that was Andrew Faulkner's reputation. She could find absolutely nothing. She was a part of virtually every business meeting that Faulkner held. There were occasional meetings that Holly did not attend, but none of these seemed to be suspicious. Holly just couldn't pinpoint why she felt her boss, Andrew Faulkner, was not clearly a good guy. The oddest part of Faulkner's life was that he never seemed to have any women around him. She didn't think he was gay, and one day he and Holly discussed her love of Daryl Evans. She questioned Faulkner about his own loves, and he simply replied, "I don't have time for such weakness." Meanwhile, Daryl Evans, the boyfriend of Holly May and top-rate former Pulitzer nominee, was immersed in investigating Faulkner. Evans continued to hear from whom he called the Ghost. The Ghost would help direct Evans to areas of questionable attributes of Faulkner. Evans had no idea who the Ghost was, but the Ghost was responsible for leading Evans to the investigation of the senator from Oklahoma who eventually pled guilty to sex trafficking and money laundering in 2012. Evans was later debunked as an addict and abolished from the top stories. This story of Faulkner could put him back on top. But it was more than that for Daryl. He, much like Holly, saw Faulkner as a person who isn't what he seems. Ground was broken on the land for the new ballpark nearly 3 months ago, and the building was going much quicker than one would think. The initial thought was that it would take 2 years to complete the construction. At the rate they were working, the ballpark would be done in half that time. Faulkner had the construction going 24 hours a day. It didn't seem possible, but it was happening. Outside the ballpark, the area was cleared, and the land dug to provide for the flooding. That would be ready in 75 days if all goes as planned. The workers would then have to be shuttled to the worksite by boat. To offset the cost, the riverboats would be up and running. Faulkner and his accountants project that at 12.5% for the house take, he can pull nearly $25,000 a week. Faulkner was very fortunate that Jorgensen agreed to the raising of wages for his workers at Messina Motors. With extra money, Faulkner was sure that the workers would visit his riverboats. Curiosity of the floating Las Vegas would get them there, and the thrill of winning would keep them coming back, and the frustration of losing would lead to the addiction. Most people come back, not for the win, but for the hopes of recouping what they lost. Faulkner needed the gamblers, not the weekend warrior types. For those people, Faulkner had the cabaret riverboat. Scantily clad women and maybe some high-dollar party girls would meet the need for those individuals. It was a Thursday afternoon when Holly May walked into the office of Andrew Faulkner. Faulkner was finishing a conversation with someone on his desk phone. You make sure you find a willing participant. Once that person agrees, you will set up a meeting with them here. I need it done within 2 weeks. Do not disappoint me, Faulkner said with force. He turned and saw Holly standing there with a file on timelines for the ballpark. Miss Rochelle, sorry you had to hear that. Holly brushed it aside with a flick of the wrist. Sounded like something intense, she said. Faulkner didn't respond, he simply stared. The new timelines for the ballpark. You need something to go out quickly, she said. Yes, do what you do. I know it will be exceptional. Faulkner said. Of course, she said. Oh, and Miss Rochelle, invite Mr. Evans to join me for lunch tomorrow. Here in my office. I believe I can clarify some of the questions he has, Faulkner said. Sure, Holly said. She turned on her heels and headed for her office. She barely sat in her chair before hitting send on her cell phone. You aren't going to believe this, she said. Chapter 11 Economic Organization for Advancement. Daryl Evans walked into the office of Andrew Faulkner with confidence on the outside and reservation on the inside. He felt he was being summoned to the principal's office in 6th grade. He and his friend Scott Morton had skipped skill and went riding on their mini-bikes. He remembered walking with confidence that day but being uneasy on the inside. The principal, Mr. Jones, chastised Scott and Daryl, and they bolted out of the office before Mr. Jones could change his mind. Daryl wasn't sure what Faulkner had in mind, but bolting from the office probably would not be an option. Ah, Mr. Evans, come have a seat. Please help yourself to the charcuterie, and there is salad in the bowl with dressing on the side. Let's eat and then discuss on a full stomach. Maybe we can learn more about each other as we break bread, Faulkner said. Daryl took a place at the table and put a few pieces of meat, cheese, and crackers together and enjoyed a bowl of salad. Daryl and Faulkner made small talk, and Evans found Faulkner to be charming. This was the most personal that Faulkner had ever been with Daryl. Daryl knew, just like Holly May, Daryl felt that Faulkner was hiding something. Was he hiding something? Was he just being made of Teflon because of his business position, or was he just an odd-behaving man? Most likely Faulkner was all three of the choices. Mark all the above, Evans, Daryl thought to himself. Faulkner moved to the end of the table and invited Daryl to do the same. Daryl complied. Faulkner propped his right ankle on his left knee and leaned back in his chair and was very relaxed. Daryl, on the other hand, leaned forward and put his elbows on the table and tried to appear fully in control. Mr. Evans, I must ask. Why are you so fascinated with me? Faulkner said. Is that a serious question? Mr. Faulkner, you are clearly the most important person in Gastown right now. You are investing billions of dollars into this community, and I write for the only newspaper in town. It is a simple equation, Daryl answered. But that is not what you are investigating. You are investigating my personal life. Things that are really no one's business but mine, Faulkner said. People are interested in you. They want to know who you are. You simply show up and change this town forever. People want to know. There isn't anything nefarious in what I am doing, Daryl said. Faulkner paused and took a big breath. He sat both of his feet on the ground and crossed his arms across his chest. Mr. Evans, I think I can help your investigation, Faulkner said. Daryl drew in a breath and spoke, "And exactly why you want to help me, Mr. Faulkner? My hope is that we can help each other. I am going to give you a big story. A story that can help you get back to the top of your field. You can get away from the Gastown Gazette. You would like that, would you not, Mr. Evans?" Faulkner said. "I still do not understand why you are wanting to help me, Mr. Faulkner," Daryl said. "I need someone that can deliver a huge story. Quite frankly, the biggest story in the history of man," Faulkner said. "Oh please. The biggest story in the history of man? What, the second coming of the Messiah or something?" Daryl said with a smirk. "Much like John Lennon said many years ago, and I am paraphrasing of course, but this story is bigger than Jesus," Faulkner said. "What if I told you that I am giving you a story that will change the economic system in the world, not just America?" Faulkner said. "And what would that be?" Daryl said. "Do you believe that the economic system in the United States is failing?" Faulkner asked. "I think everyone would agree with that. Congress prints money that is virtually worthless. Not quite Nazi Germany or Confederate States level, but a mess nevertheless," Daryl said. "And you would agree that the Federal Reserve and banks have been robbing people for years," Faulkner said. "I am willing to concede your belief," Daryl said. "Very well," Faulkner said. "Have you heard of the Economic Organization for Advancement? It is an organization that can remedy these failures," Faulkner said. "I am familiar with the EOA. There was a meeting last month in Morocco. A discussion of a one-world economy, I believe," Daryl said. Faulkner leaned back again and then spoke. "It isn't just a myth or a belief. It is happening." Faulkner reached into his suit jacket pocket, and he slid Daryl a debit card or a credit card. On the face of the card in bright blue letters was EOA. "What is this?" Daryl said. "It is the debit card that will change the economy forever. It will eliminate governmental money and the need for banks. 99.4% of Americans have some form of direct deposit. This will take the place of any need for anything but the EOA card. Every EOA card will have the same CVV," Faulkner said. "The same CVV? Why? That seems unsafe." "The CVV is what makes a debit card unique," Daryl said. "Uniqueness will not be a need. All information will be disseminated and held electronically in the EOA. All buying can be monitored for the protection of the people. It will be safer than anything that has ever been developed. People will quickly realize all the advantages. No need for credit cards. All loans will be handled by the EOA. They will be 100% interest-free." "What could be better?" Faulkner said. "Interest-free? How can that work?" Daryl said. "Because the EOA does not need to make money. All payments become automatic. It is simple and it is convenient. Life changes forever," Faulkner said. Daryl picked up the card and studied it. Emblazoned was his name, Daryl Edward Evans. He turned the card over and the CVV was $999. Daryl was having trouble finding holes in the story but still didn't trust Faulkner. "So, when does this economic change take place?" Daryl said. Faulkner realized he was winning over Daryl. "Mr. Evans, I am saying it will all begin on January 1st. It is financed by me and 32 others. We will financially support the EOA as it gains its traction. You have heard of the Bavarian Grove, no doubt. It is a part of a larger group known as the Lords of Brimstone. Trust me, Mr. Evans, this is fail-safe." Daryl turned the card over and over in his hands. "I want to be fair to you. I will do more investigation and I will write a rough draft of a story on the EOA and I will send a copy to your liaison, Miss May, and the two of you can give the approval." "Agreed, Mr. Faulkner." Faulkner slammed his open hand on the table with excitement and shook Daryl's hand. "Agreed, Mr. Evans." Chapter 12. Mother Nature flips a switch. No one was prepared for the week that would be. Daryl Evans traveled to New York City for a well-publicized meeting of the Economic Organization for Advancement. Andrew Faulkner felt the article written by Evans about the EOA and the new purchasing cards, the name the EOA decided for the newly formed debit cards, was fair. The questions that Evans raised were legit. Daryl had taken the time to explain the advantages of the ideas of no longer needing banks or even credit unions. To the happiness of many libertarians, the idea of the elimination of the Federal Reserve was something they had wanted for years. Daryl was even lucky enough to land an interview with Dr. Ron Paul. Dr. Paul was thoroughly thrilled that the Federal Reserve would be at an end. However, like Daryl, the questions raised by Dr. Paul were simple enough. 1. Who would be monitoring the use of the new purchasing cards? 2. What would be the purpose of the monitoring? 3. Would this be the true beginning of a one-world government? Dr. Paul explained that the switch from one domineering government to another would not be well received. The flip side to that could be that there would no longer be a need for war. Dr. Paul reasoned that if the need for loans and debt were no longer taking place between countries, then potentially the power could be solely in the hands of the people. If this would be true, then it would be a good thing, Dr. Paul surmised. Daryl and Dr. Paul agreed that the questions would only be answered in time. Libertarians were encouraged at the possibilities while the Democrats and Republicans were highly frustrated. They wanted things to remain as they were. They wanted the power in the hands of the government. Ultimately, Daryl saw it as 6 of one and 6 of another. The article raised the imagination, frustrations, and hopes for all the people. Faulkner loved the publicity. All publicity is good, he alleged. Daryl and another reporter by the name of Stu McGill were sitting for lunch at a small pizza place just off Wall Street in New York when the news began to spread. A massive hurricane had hit the state of Washington. Washington is a state that is virtually devoid of natural disasters. In Washington this day, the hurricane devastated almost the whole state. Thousands were missing and presumed dead. Daryl and Stu were stunned. People all around them began to chatter as the news hit their cell phones. Daryl noticed the cans of pizza sauce begin to slowly tumble onto the floor. He felt a shake. Stu, let's get out of here, Daryl said. I think this is an earthquake. Daryl grabbed Stu by the arm and sprinted out of the pizza place as other patrons and employees followed behind. As they bolted through the door, the earthquake was in full force. Buildings were shaking as bricks began to tumble about them. Run, Stu, Daryl said. Where? Stu screamed. There. Under the bowl, Daryl yelled. The two of them slid under the bowl as debris continued to fall for a full 60 seconds. An earthquake in New York, a hurricane in Washington. What the hell was happening? Stu checked his phone. There are reports of spontaneous combustion in Japan. Is that even possible? Daryl, what is happening? I have no idea, was Daryl's response. We got to try and get to the car and get out of the city. These buildings aren't going to stand for long. Stu nodded as the two of them got out from under the Wall Street bowl and sprinted to the rented car parked 4 blocks away. This was just the beginning. Chapter 13, Birthing Pains? Daryl started the rental car and started driving as quickly as possible. To his surprise, there wasn't an immense amount of traffic. He drove through the tunnel and headed towards New Jersey. The two rode in silence for the first 30 minutes or so. The silence ended quickly when a clunking hit the hood of the white SUV. What was that? Daryl said with anxiousness. I believe it was hail, Stu retorted. Hail? The sun is shining. Daryl had barely finished the sentence when the car began to get pelted with hail. Some of the hail was as large as golf balls. Oh my gosh, Daryl yelled. Get under the overpass. Stu yelled over the pinging of the hail. The clouds suddenly turned completely black. It was as if they were driving in the dead of winter. Daryl steered the SUV to the side of the road and flipped on the blinkers. What in the world is going on? Daryl said. Is this some strange climate change shenanigan? I don't think this is climate change, Stu said. Well, nothing else makes sense, Daryl said. I have a theory, Stu said with a look to Daryl. Care to hear? I think I got time, Daryl replied with a chuckle. The hail and storm seemed to pass, and Daryl dropped the SUV into drive and began to ease his way back onto the interstate. So, this is so bizarre that I am wondering if the Earth is having birthing pains, Stu stated. Daryl turned and looked at Stu. The Earth having birthing pains? What the heck are you talking about? Well, you know, like in the Bible. Strange events and young men dreaming dreams, all that stuff. Birthing pains are the signal to the return of Christ. He returns for his bride, the church, Stu said as gestured with his hands. You believe that stuff? Daryl said as he gripped the steering wheel as the winds began to increase and blow hard against the car. Well, yes, of course, I am a believer, Stu commented. Did you say you are a believer? Like Justin Bieber, Daryl said with a laugh. This is serious. Look at the crazy happening. HEY, Stu yelled as the car swerved over onto the berm of the road. The winds were gusting at tornado level now. You got to pull over. There. A culvert. Quick, Stu exclaimed. The two men ran as quickly as possible and dove into the culvert. It sounded like a train as Stu and Daryl could see the twister gaining speed and destroying all in its path. Just as quickly as it arrived, it was gone. Daryl emerged first and Stu followed. Okay, tell me more about this birthing pain stuff, Daryl said as he gave Stu a pat on the back. Chapter 14, What do you believe? The SUV was pointed the opposite way that they had been driving, for crying out loud, Daryl said. It seems fine. The tornado must have spun the rental around, Daryl stated. Stu walked around the SUV and checked tires. Everything appeared to be in working order. Let's go, Stu said. It was as if they were the only car headed west. It took a couple of cranks, but the SUV fired up. Daryl quickly U-turned and started on their journey. Where are we going? Stu asked. I guess, home, Daryl replied. I don't know what else to do. Stu nodded. So, you don't believe? Stu asked Daryl. I don't disbelieve, Daryl said almost in a frank manner. Not quite the same, Daryl. Either you believe or you don't, Stu said. I know there has to be a creator, but I am not quite sure it is God, you know, capital G, God. I know there is a God, Daryl said. It could be Buddha, Krishna, Allah, whatever. Ah, Stu said with a nod, you have that universalist belief. The idea that you can believe in the wholeness of all the gods, and it will get you to heaven. I suppose. I mean, I went to VBS, you know, Vacation Bible School as a kid. Mainly for the cookies and Kool-Aid, Daryl said with a nervous chuckle. Oh, I get it, Stu replied, it was the natural summer event in the Bible Belt. I went all the time too. But as an adult, I returned to those teachings. I believe that God is real, that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. You know? And that Christ will return. And, well, maybe these are the rumblings. The Bible says that there will be unexplainable events. Can you explain what we have seen today? Stu said as he looked intently at Daryl. I suppose you got me there. I am safe, though, right? I mean, I am a good guy. I do the right thing. I am safe, right? Daryl asked 2 times. Being a good guy isn't enough. I mean, it is important. I truly believe that at some point whenever Christ returns, we will all have to answer 3 questions. 1. Do you believe in God? 2. Do you believe that Christ is my son and the Messiah? 3. Did you love my people? Stu said. Being a good guy is essentially loving others, but that isn't enough. Daryl reasoned. Lucky for you, you have time, Stu told Daryl. Maybe. Chapter 15, What is going on? Stu and Daryl found a Motel 6 somewhere in Ohio after driving through a pop-up snowstorm. It was unbelievable. They had seen a twister, and then as they passed through Pennsylvania, a sudden snowstorm caused a whiteout and had Stu and Daryl continuing their conversation as to what could be happening. Could this be an attack by a foreign country? Could this be our own country affecting the weather? Daryl stated out loud. Or, it could be the signaling of the Rapture, Stu said. Stu was no longer matter-of-fact and more serious and determined to get Daryl to listen. I really didn't intend on you giving an answer. It was more of a statement, Daryl said. But what if I am right? It is my career to try and get people saved. Journalism is just a job, Stu said. What? Daryl asked. Think about it. We are just passing through this life, so my job is what I do to feed myself, clothe myself, and provide myself shelter. But the thing I should always do is try and get people saved, hence my career, Stu explained. Stu and Daryl watched the news on TV in stunned silence. Reports of bizarre weather occurrences, earthquakes, twisters, tsunamis, snowstorms, all in the last 24 hours. Daryl was silent in his thoughts. What if Stu is right? What does that mean? How do I get saved? Daryl looked over and Stu was sound asleep. Guess he isn't scared, Daryl said, laughing to himself. Daryl Evans woke the next morning and could hear the shower running. He remembered that he saw a donut shop down the street when they drove in last night. He decided he would slip out and grab a few and a couple of coffees. They would be ready for Stu when he gets out of the shower. A bell rang on the door when Daryl entered the small shop. There were only 2 people working and a handful of people grumbling in line. Once Daryl got to the front counter, a large man in a flour-covered apron asked him what he would like. It doesn't seem like you have much left, Daryl said. Sorry about that, Mac, 2 of my workers didn't show up today. Son of a bitches didn't even bother to call and say they wouldn't be here. No call, no shows, the dirty SOBs, the man said. Wow, Daryl said. Just give me 4 of your best and a couple of coffees. Go ahead and get your own coffee. Over there on the table. Don't have time for anything but black coffee, the man said. No worries. Sounds perfect to me, Daryl said. Daryl paid and dropped a $10 bill in the tip cup. He got inside the rented SUV and began driving back to the motel. A mile from the motel, traffic slowed, and he could see the recognizable red lights on a police vehicle and an ambulance. As Daryl eased past, he could see 2 cars in the ditch. He rolled down the window and showed the police officer his ID. What happened here? Damnedest thing. 2 cars collided and rolled into the ditch. No occupants in either car, the officer said. Ha, Daryl uttered. You heard me, the officer said. Move along, sir, unless you are going to park and report. Daryl drove the last mile to the motel and parked, grabbing the drinks and donuts. He opened the door to the room and could hear the water in the shower still running. Hey, you are going to shrivel into a raisin. Let's go, gotta hit the road, Daryl called to Stu. Daryl figured he would have to wait on a shower for when he gets home. He wanted to get on the road. Let us go, Daryl yelled as he knocked on the door. He checked the door handle, and it wasn't locked. He opened the door and was engulfed in steam from the hot shower. "STU," Daryl yelled. There wasn't any response. What the world, Daryl muttered. He reluctantly approached the shower curtain and peeked around. Daryl was shocked, the shower was empty. Chapter 16: The Missing. Daryl took a big bite of a jelly-filled donut and walked to the office. He thought maybe Stu had needed another towel or soap or something. Daryl walked into the office and walked to the window. He didn't see anyone. He rang the bell a couple of times and still no one came to the window. "Hello," Daryl called out forcefully. He craned his neck and looked around, still nothing. As he walked out of the office, Daryl saw a man sitting on a bench with tears in his eyes. "You okay, sir?" Daryl asked. "She's gone," the man replied. "She, who?" Daryl asked. "My wife, she's gone," the man said through tears. "She passed?" Daryl asked again. "No, I mean, I don't know. She is just gone." "Not here," the man said as he sniffled. "Strange. My friend is gone too. Look, there are some police officers down the road. Maybe I can take you there and we can inquire from them, or they can direct us to the police station. Come on. Look, here is my ID. I am a reporter," Daryl told him. The man rose and followed him to the car. "You want a donut?" Daryl asked. "What?" the man replied. "Never mind," Daryl said. The 2 of them drove back to the scene where Daryl had seen the 2 cars in the ditch. Daryl eased the SUV to the side of the road and got out and approached an officer who stood gawking at the place where the 2 cars had been. Obviously, the wrecker had removed both abandoned vehicles. Sir, Daryl Evans. I am a national reporter and I have this gentleman here and we would like to report a couple of missing persons. You will have to get in line, the officer said. Excuse me, Daryl asked. Been getting missing person calls all day. For a reporter, haven't you been watching the news? The officer said as Daryl shook his head no. The man did the same. There are people missing everywhere. There are abandoned cars, missing relatives and even hundreds of plane crashes, he surmised. What? Daryl said. Who knows, the officer said. The man interrupted for the first time. I know what it is. It's the Rapture. Wait, what did you say? Daryl asked. The Rapture, the man said as he turned and walked back to the SUV. Chapter 17 The Rapture, 1 Corinthians 15 verses 51 to 52. Daryl got inside the SUV and started the vehicle. So, you believe that stuff? Daryl said as he looked at the man in the passenger seat. You got a better explanation? The man asked. So, what are you gonna do? Daryl said. I guess I will get my cell phone out of the room and text as many of family and friends and see who else is still here, the man said. Good point, Daryl said as he informed Google to call Holly. She answered. Oh, thank goodness, Daryl said as the man snapped his head in his direction and gave a quizzical look. Daryl, have you seen the news? What is happening? Holly asked. I don't know. I have heard some people say, the Rapture, Daryl said trailing off at the end of the statement. Holly sat silent. Stu is missing. He is one of the ones, Holly said. Yep. Look, I am going to get to Indy as soon as possible. Will you be at the apartment? Daryl asked. Yes. Hurry, please. I am scared, Holly said. I love you, Daryl said. I love you too, hurry, Holly said. As the SUV rolled to a stop, Daryl turned and looked at the man in the passenger seat. Can you tell me more about this Rapture thing? Sure. What do you want to know? The man said. Everything, Daryl said. Chapter 18 The Occurrence. Daryl Evans began his trek back to Indianapolis with plenty on his mind. He had spoken to Holly Mae earlier and could tell she was very distraught. He was driving rapidly down the interstate and was taken aback by how many abandoned cars were on the road. Some in the ditch, some in head-on collisions and some simply smashed into the guardrails and construction barrels. It was eerie to say the least. Daryl saw the smoke from what he could accurately predict was downed planes. Emergency vehicles were screaming all around him. He tuned into Sirius XM and instead of the 80s on 8, he got the emergency broadcast system. The EBS was trying to calm everyone, but even President Martin and his family were among the missing. Vice President Tuhey had taken power in the interim and he too was distraught as his wife and 2 daughters were among the numbered who couldn't be found. Daryl had plenty on his mind as he rolled through his brain the possibility of the Rapture. That Jesus Christ had returned and taken his followers. Daryl was trying to piece together the findings amongst the chaos. The EBS was referring to the current situation as the occurrence. The occurrence, he thought. Well, that is better than being completely lost and searching and desolate. Daryl's thoughts were interrupted by the ding of fuel light. Shit, he muttered to himself. Daryl was going to need gas. He didn't want to stop. He wanted to get to Holly and face the facts. What might he encounter at a gas station, truck stop or convenience store? Daryl had thoughts of 9/11 and COVID when there was widespread looting, and this, what did the EBS call it, the occurrence, was far worse than the 2 previous events combined. Daryl exited the interstate and began a side highway. Daryl wasn't sure why, but he just thought in his mind that maybe a convenience store ran by mom and pop would be better, maybe safer than a major truck stop like Flying J or Love's. He saw a sign that simply said gas and thought, well, as good as any. He pulled into the parking lot and immediately was having second thoughts. He pulled up to the gas pump and saw 2 men sitting on a bench each with shotguns across their laps. One of the men was older, probably in his 50s, and sat looking at the SUV that Daryl was driving with a tilted head as if thinking friend or foe. The other was a man in his 20s and extremely well built. He could have passed for a professional athlete for sure. Daryl stepped out of the SUV and walked into the sight of the two men. "Gentlemen," he said with a nod. "I need some gas. Any available here?" "Depends," the older man said. "Depends on," was Daryl's reply. "What you got to trade?" the man replied as he spit out a brown strand of tobacco. "Well, I have the purchasing card," Daryl said. "We don't take that spawn of Satan," he said without doubt. Well, what do you take?" "I don't have cash," Daryl stuttered. "If you haven't noticed, government don't seem to be much in charge," the man said with a sarcastic laugh. Daryl paused and measured his words. "Look, my name is Daryl Evans, and I am a reporter. I was in New York when the occurrence happened." "The occurrence?" the man laughed. "Yep, you sound like a reporter. It is the Rapture, Mr. Evans. The Lord done did come back and take his people and left us schmucks to survive until the demons or whatever kills us," the man replied as he spit out another brown strand. "You believe it was the Rapture?" Daryl replied. "What do you think? A bunch of aliens from Mars? Maybe the Russians that Uncle Ronnie Reagan warned us about in the 80s, or maybe it was a bunch of Mexicans from south of the border," the man said with a full-out laugh that was joined by the younger man. Another man emerged from inside the store. He was tall, probably 6'3", and had a big round belly with a long white beard and balding white hair to match. Daryl thought the man could play Santa Claus in December and make some money in a side hustle. "I suppose the Rapture is as good of an explanation as any," Daryl said. The man spoke again. "You say, you are Daryl Evans the reporter? The Daryl Evans that broke the story about government corruption? You that Daryl Evans?" "I am guilty as charged." "Are you familiar with me?" Daryl asked. "Of course, just because we are a bit off the beaten path here in Ohio, don't mean we are complete hillbillies," the man said. "So, if you believe in the Rapture and God and whatnot, why are you here?" Daryl asked the men. "Well, you know, I did some bad things in my youth, and I guess I never really repented. My wife, Millie, used to tell me all the time that I needed to ask forgiveness, but I guess I felt I was just too bad. You know, too bad for him to forgive. I spent some time in the pokey for beating a guy with a tire iron. I don't feel bad for doing it. He was messing with Millie, and I had to establish that she was mine. That is important, you know," he said as he spit out his entire chew and dug out the rest with his finger and tossed it aside. Daryl turned to the young man. "And you? You believe this Rapture stuff?" "Oh yes, sir, good book is very clear on this. The good Lord took his people, and we are here to figure it out," the young man said. "So why? Why didn't God take you?" Daryl asked. The young man raised his pant leg and exposed an ankle that had clearly been destroyed by injury. "Suffered this injury my sophomore year at Rutgers. I paid my dues my freshman year, and then in game 2, I got crunched. Guess I always blame the Lord. Obviously, I made a bad choice. How about you, Mr. Evans? What is your story?" "Never really thought about it. I guess I always knew that there was a God. Never concerned myself too much about it. Clearly, if you are right, I made a major mistake. But I really need gas right now." "What can we do?" Daryl asked of the men. The large man in the door finally spoke. "I am Jinx Malloy, and this Shirley man is Hank Sorby, and this young stud is my grandson, Josh. Tell you what, Mr. Evans, you give me those shoes you got on and you can get $80 of gas." "These? They are second-hand Jordans." "They are first issue," Daryl said. "You don't haggle very well, Mr. Evans. I know they are knockoffs, but not everyone does. We also have 4 10-gallon cans you can fill if you give me those rims off your tires," Jinx told him. "It's a rental," Daryl said. "I don't think Hertz is going to care, you know, given the circumstances," Jinx said. "True and deal. But what are you going to use them for?" Daryl said. "Gonna melt them down, we will find a way to use them," Jinx said. Daryl got his $80 in gas and filled the 4 containers as Hank and Jinx took the rims from the SUV. Daryl grabbed a pair of slides from his suitcase and slid them on his feet. They had the recognizable Colts horseshoe emblem on them. He walked over to the 3 men and shook the hands of the men. "It has been informative," Daryl said. Write the truth, Mr. Evans, Hank said. Daryl nodded. Who dey? Josh said. Go blue, Daryl called as he slid into the SUV and fired the engine. Chapter 19 The Encounter. Daryl Evans had much to think about after his encounter with Jinx, Josh, and Hank. Write the truth, he was told. Just what exactly is the truth? What would it mean to write the truth? What would people think if he wrote an article about the Rapture? Would people think he was crazy? If people think he is crazy, would it even matter? If this is the Rapture, then what does any of this matter? Daryl reasoned, he is a journalist and a good one at that. So ultimately, Daryl has never been afraid of the fallout of his writing, so why care if people think he is crazy? Maybe it is time he doesn't just pander to people he knows will support him. It is easy to write about drug cartels or even guys like Faulkner, but to write about the good Lord in heaven? Good grief, Daryl thought to himself. I am not even sure how to pray, Daryl thought to himself. When was the last time I prayed? 5 years ago? 10 years ago? 20 years ago? Daryl had no idea. Dear God, I guess this is how this goes. I don't know what to say, but I am afraid. For the first time in years, I am afraid. I don't even know what I am afraid of. Maybe I am ashamed. God, please keep me and Holly safe. What the hell? Daryl suddenly screamed. There was a dark cloud that appeared out of absolutely nothing and tried to encompass the SUV. Daryl swerved and looked back in the rear mirror, and there was nothing. Just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. That was a close one, a voice said. Daryl snapped his head to the side, and there in the passenger seat was Stu. Stu? Could it be Stu? Stu? Is that you? I thought I lost you to the Rapture. Where did you go? He asked. Oh, I am not Stu, the person said. You are not Stu? But you look like Stu. Who are you? Daryl stammered. Oh, well, I am an angel. You asked for protection. Close one, right? The voice said. An angel, come on man, an angel? Daryl inquired. Daryl, how else do you expect that I got inside your car when you were driving like 75 miles an hour? You prayed for protection, and I was sent, the figure replied. An angel, huh? And that dark smoke was a demon, right? Daryl said sarcastically. Yep, it was. Close one. The darkness really wants you. You know, you are a journalist and all, the voice said. At times Daryl could see the figure, and other times it seemed as if it was a disembodied voice. Am I to believe that you are an angel sent to save me? And that was a demon, Daryl said. Still, yes, and instead of what the hell, you should have said, we're from hell, the figure said as it seemed to chuckle. Get it? The demon was from hell. This time the figure was clearly smiling. I get an angel who thinks he is Jerry Seinfeld, Daryl said. I chose the body of Stu. I figured it was the last person you talked to that was raptured. It made sense. It would get your attention. Did you think I would have a halo and flap my wings and the Angels win the World Series with Danny Glover as the manager? It isn't really like that, the body replied. What are you talking about? Daryl said. Remember that movie, Angels in the Outfield? It was great. A nice feel-good story, and who doesn't love Danny Glover? Remember the one with Joe Pesci when they were old guys fishing? Fantastic stuff, the voice said. Daryl turned, and again the figure was gone, but he could feel its presence. So, what do I do? Daryl asked. Write the truth, Daryl. I think you have been told that. God will be with you. Trust him, Daryl. A lot of bad stuff is going to happen, Daryl. It will get worse before it gets better. Don't be afraid. God is near. Demons lurk everywhere, the figure said. Demons and angels, Daryl shook his head. This is a lot. What do I do? Daryl pled. Write the truth, Daryl, and the figure was clearly gone. But wait, hey, where are you? Daryl said. Daryl looked frantically. There wasn't anything to be seen. He looked in the rearview mirror, the outside mirrors, out both door windows, nothing. He looked in the back seat. Nothing. Nothing. He looked forward and as clear as day, he saw the words form right the truth. Daryl felt a chill. Chapter 20 Gog and Magog, Ezekiel 38-39. Daryl drove aimlessly. Unlike an hour before, Daryl wasn't deep in thought. He drove in utter thoughtlessness. His ears locked into what was being said on his radio. There has been an invasion of Israel. Reports have nearly 40 million soldiers from the north have invaded the nation of Israel. They appear to have organized in the Ukraine and Russia as well as the Confederation of States. Many of these soldiers are Muslim. In the current chaos of the world, it was the time for these countries to attack. All people in the United States are urged to watch for any secret organizations. Any clandestine units are to be turned into the local authorities. We will give updates as we receive them. Daryl suddenly was snapped into thought. Are they urging the citizens of the United States to turn each other into authorities? This is unreal. What is going on? I think the truth just took a very different form. Daryl spoke out loud, I need to learn more about the Rapture. Daryl parked the SUV outside of the apartment where Holly Mae lived. He barely noticed the looting and chaos in Indianapolis. Here we go, he thought, write the truth. Chapter 21 The Rise of Faulkner. Over the next few months, the chaos grew. The aftermath of the missing was felt by everyone. Daryl Evans had buried himself in learning all he could about the Rapture. He was sure IT was responsible for the missing people. He was sure that he had missed the gospel ship. What began as skepticism gave way to full-level acceptance. He wasn't as he would call a believer as he figured that all was lost. He began a series of articles about his journey to the acceptance of the Rapture. As expected, the articles were met with widespread emotion on both sides of the issue. Those who accepted the idea of the Rapture at times seemed as if they were extreme foil hat-wearing loons, and the other side was deemed worse. It ranged from complete atheism to the alien-accepting group. Without question, the belief system didn't on either side certainly had no impact on the reality that people were missing. It was also apparent that none of the missing are coming back. The chaos was met with behaviors running from eat, drink and be merry to suicide to the rediscovery of faith. Daryl and Holly had long discussions, sometimes beginning in the early evening and not concluding until the early morning hours. Their long hours of debate led to basically nowhere. There was no resolution. Even if there were answers, what should they do now? They missed the Rapture. Eat, drink and be merry wasn't a solution. Suicide was not an option either. Through all the issues, the one person who seemed to come out smelling like a rose was none other than Andrew Faulkner. With Faulkner and his group of 5, as they were called, solving the economic crisis with his purchasing cards, people turned to them to try and solve all the problems. Faulkner embraced the opportunities. Faulkner and his group of 5 solved the military movements in the Middle East. To be exact, Faulkner brokered a peace treaty for the ages. Only this seemed different. Daryl felt this was yet another step in the Rapture. Daryl continued to study the scriptures and try and piece together what might happen next. More and more Daryl was beginning to not only believe in the Holy Bible, but it was becoming a daily reading. Daryl even was enjoying the reading of the scriptures. One thing for sure, Daryl wished he had read what God had to say years ago. It was like discovering you forgot your shoes after walking through glass. Faulkner was away in Europe. Faulkner was a rising star. He was becoming more than just one of the 50 most influential men. He and his group of 5 were the most influential men. Faulkner was stepping out of the shower and thinking about the next steps for setting up a one-world government. He wiped the mirror clean of shower fog and then gasped, "Who? Who are you?" He snapped his head around to see an Arabic-looking man. He was large but didn't seem real. He had shoulder-length hair, and it was dark, so dark that it seemed to have a blue tint. He had a dark goatee and a muscular body that was exposed by his skin-tight shirt. It had a smiley face and "don't worry, be happy" surrounding the face. The man laughed hard and then answered, "I have many names. You can call me Luke. You are here to try and develop a government that provides complete peace, no?" It was more of a statement than a question. I can call in my bodyguards and have you removed. Luke, Andrew said. Oh, Andrew, your bodyguards have no control over me. In fact, I control them, the man said. The voice sounded deeper, and it was like several people were speaking. Andrew, all power comes from me. I can give you all the authority on this earth. Not just peace in a small part of land. No, I can give you authority over all the earth. Just bow to me, Andrew, the man said. Suddenly, Andrew's eyes were opened. He saw the power of the Spirit standing before him. Ah yes, you see now. Luke is in Lucifer. Bow to me, Andrew, and I give you the world. You don't need your, what do they call it, the Gorge of Five. You only need my spirit that I give to you. I give you that spirit. Bow to me, Andrew. The voice again sounded large, this time like thousands. Andrew Faulkner fell to his knees. Praise you, my Father, he said. Chapter 22 The Tribulation Begins, Revelation chapters 6 to 19. Alejandro Rojas had assumed the position of media liaison for Andrew Faulkner. Holly was quickly just an afterthought. Faulkner wanted to retain Holly as she was such a large part of his rise to fame, however Luke made it clear that Alejandro was now Faulkner's go-to guy. Holly was relieved. The discussions between Holly and her lover Daryl were eye-opening. They concluded that Faulkner was not as he seemed. Was he bad? Was he really bad? How could the man that brokered peace in the Middle East and used the economic organization for advancement to solve the economic issues and problems of the entire globe be bad? Today was a big day. Alejandro had miraculously assembled the major media outlets, of which there were only two left, one for the Western Hemisphere and one for the Eastern Hemisphere, and both seemed to do whatever Alejandro requested or more accurately demanded. Today, Faulkner would be meeting with both Pope John David I and Edmund Cohen, the Jewish Prime Minister. The three of them are going to sign an agreement to allow all religions to worship freely and to make it illegal to ban anyone from their respective houses of worship. No longer would anyone representing a religion be allowed to preach hatred against anything that was against a list of acceptable practices as outlined in the Covenant of Commandments written by Luke and mandated by Alejandro and brought to life by Faulkner. Those who were beginning to worship underground saw the COC, as it was called, as an abomination against God, the true God. Holly and Daryl were attending the 5th Street Common House where Todd Miner was preaching the true gospel. Today was the beginning of the END. Today would be the emergence of Faulkner as not only a financial and governmental guru, but today he becomes all things to the world. Today Faulkner will appear along with the Pope and the Israeli Prime Minister, and they will present the COC. Faulkner planned to take this worldwide opportunity to present plans to end famine, hunger, homelessness, crime, and control all health issues. Today he becomes a true world leader, no, not just a world leader, but today he becomes the world leader. Holly and Daryl sat in Daryl's apartment watching on hemisphere-wide television, HWTV. The scene began with Faulkner, Cohen and Pope John David sitting at a large mahogany table. They all were incredibly relaxed as Faulkner began to outline his proposal for a world where all could live as one. He quoted John Lennon, he quoted Elizabeth Cady Stanton, he quoted Thomas Jefferson, he quoted John Locke, he quoted Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, and even Ronald Reagan. He embraced as many theoretical people as possible from all sides of life to show his own completeness. When Faulkner ended, he handed off to Pope John David, who introduced the COC to the world. At one point, Holly shuddered, and Daryl shook his head in amazement. "How can this be happening?" Daryl said. Holly paused before giving her answer. "This is the end. This is where all the woke society finally ends. Instead, many freedoms, this is ultimately going to end freedoms. The teachings of Pastor Todd are basically being rendered illegal." Holly and Daryl both now stared in disbelief as the entirety of the COC was appearing on the television screen. "Oh God, what do we do?" Holly said, not expecting an audible answer, when Daryl whispered, "We pray." They instantaneously dropped to their knees and began to pray. By the time Cohen was done explaining how world peace would be maintained as instrumented by the new Confederation of the Globe Army, or the CBA, Holly and Daryl realized they had heard the classic sandwich speech. good things, Faulkner, complete loss of religious freedoms, Pope John David, and then complete kumbaya with Cohen to finish. It was brilliant, Daryl said. The majority of the people left here on Earth aren't being taught in underground churches, they are going to believe in these three: hook, line, and sinker. I think we should go to 5th Street and see if others gather. Agreed? Holly simply nodded yes. Chapter 23, Pastor Todd Minor. As Daryl and Holly entered the 5th Street Commons basement, they were not surprised to see a handful of others there. On their way over, they spoke about how they anticipated that others would feel their way. The need to gather. The need for corporate prayer. The need to be led by Pastor Todd Minor, perhaps. Maybe all three, but some combination of any of the three. The general feeling in the basement was of obvious concern. Many questions were simply, what? What do we do? What does all this mean? What comes next? Pastor Todd Minor seemed completely prepared. As the dozen or so people gathered, Pastor Minor began to speak. Let's begin with prayer. Pastor Todd gave just a simple prayer to begin and ended with the Lord's Prayer, and then he began a semi-prepared mini-sermon. Pastor Todd spoke of the 7 seals of the tribulation and explained how they were occurring even as Faulkner was painting a cotton candy world. Pastor Todd explained Revelation 6-9. He explained the seals as the few nodded and occasionally gave an "Oh Lord, save us, or we have to end this." Pastor Todd shook his head no and said, "It is in the Lord's hands. We have made our bed by being left behind." The group dropped silent, knowing everything Pastor Todd was saying was true. Pastor Todd ended by saying, "I suggest we gather for 7 straight days and allow me to continue to teach the meaning within the book of Revelation." The people agreed. "I suggest we choose a different location each night," Daryl said. "We need to stay on the move. Darth Faulkner's stormtroopers may be on the prowl playing out the COC." They all agreed, and Jimmy Roberts suggested they meet at his house tomorrow night. He lived on a small farm just outside of Gastown. It was a modest 7-acre farm with 2 barns. The back barn would serve as the perfect place to meet. It was a 2-story with a modified game room that used to be for his kids and now was just a place Jimmy would go to shoot pool and clear his mind. Jimmy's wife went with what people within the renegade churches were calling the first wave. His oldest boy Jimmy Jr. was killed in action during the Great Chinese War of 2074. His youngest son Ronald is serving 7 years for possession of cocaine at the Wabash Correctional Facility in southern Indiana. Handshakes and hugs were passed around as the 12 and Pastor Todd left each other's company for the evening. Chapter 24, Pastor Todd Minor, Part 2. Pastor Todd Minor was the leader of a megachurch. Its members numbered almost 15,000 and had Saturday night services and 3 services on Sunday. Pastor Todd was the Joel Osteen of the early 2070s. Then came a fall from grace. Pastor Todd began losing his focus, as he had called it at the time, and losing his salvation as he referred to it now. It was an innocent beginning. A young girl had begun to come to the Church of Indianapolis for counseling. She was a drug user and in paying for drugs had become pregnant at the hands of a local bad guy named Ramos James. James was a local dealer and reported pimp. He was the father. One of Minor's associate pastors, Murray Riggins, innocently introduced Sandy Malone to Pastor Todd. Sandy was a late teen with blonde hair and crystal blue eyes. At the time, Pastor Todd didn't notice that Sandy had all the right curves in all the right places. 2 months into counseling, Pastor Todd had taken the counseling from Pastor Murray. Sandy had ended the pregnancy and was dealing with depression and guilt and was self-medicating with the help of Ramos James. Pastor Todd was going through all his teachings, and one day as Sandy was preparing to leave his office, she suddenly turned and asked Pastor Todd if she could give him a hug, and things went downhill from there. Over the next 2 sessions with Sandy, the end hug was beginning to linger, until one day Sandy looked up at Pastor Todd and kissed him. Without thinking, Pastor Todd opened his mouth slowly, as did Sandy, and they explored each other's tongues. Pastor Todd knew he was wrong, but his carnal nature simply took over, and his sense of above getting caught because of his standing in the community gave him confidence to continue. 4 months later and many trysts later, Sandy was again pregnant, this time by Pastor Todd. And Sandy was talking. And Sandy was talking a lot. Ramos James began showing up to Pastor Todd's demanding payments, and slowly Sandy was back working with James. Things unraveled quickly for Pastor Todd. He was disgraced, and it wasn't long before Pastor Todd was divorced and spent 2 years drowning his fall with alcohol and sex with strangers and even former church members. He was a mess. After the first wave, Pastor Todd's former wife, her new husband, and Pastor's 2 children as well as his wife's 3 new children were taken. The experience led to sobriety for Pastor Todd, and he began teaching about the rapture to those in the 5th Street Commons basement. He had his new congregation. It was an unpaid position, it didn't have a fancy chapel, there were no offerings, and it was a job he truly cherished. He loved his Lord and cherished his newfound spirituality. Chapter 25, Revelation. Over the next 7 nights the tiny congregation met in different places without interruption. Pastor Todd Miner taught the entire book of Revelation. He revealed everything that Scripture said would happen and addressed those things that had already come to pass. Time was speeding up, and Faulkner and Alejandro were in the spotlight every day. Alejandro had emerged as the spokesperson for all things global, as there was a press conference every day with reveals of all that was taking place worldwide. There were film clips of the World Army rounding up people who were violating the new rules. There were film clips of reassignment camps, clips of farms that would end all hunger. There were clips of Faulkner shaking hands and kissing babies. Holly and Daryl were disgusted. They began to formulate a plan. A plan to kill Faulkner and Alejandro. Daryl would kill one and Holly the other. The plan had to be executed to perfection. No, there could not be any mistakes. They had to do it when the two would be separated. The plan encompassed all their time. Daryl was doing his job and then would come home to a now unemployed Holly, and the rest of the evening they would see Faulkner's itinerary and try and determine when the plan could be executed. The date would be June 12, 2081. Faulkner would be officially opening the new floating ballpark, only now it would be a new version of the Roman Colosseum. Prisoners would be forced to fight to the death. With no more war and no need to feed the prisoners, it would be perfect. Holly and Daryl knew Alejandro would be there. He always seems to be lurking in the background but never in the forefront. It gave them 42 days to plan. Chapter 26, Executing the Plan. June 12th was now here. Holly and Daryl were confident, though their bellies were aflutter. The plan was drawn up as flawlessly as could be. Holly would use her familiar face around to get backstage. No one would expect her to have devious thoughts concerning Faulkner. Daryl would focus on Alejandro. He too was a familiar face, and he had his media credentials. Daryl had a .44 Magnum hidden in his satchel. No one would suspect his satchel. His man purse, as Holly called it. Normally it contained a camera and a notebook, a tablet, and an old-fashioned cassette recorder. One that had become a bit of a trademark of Daryl's. People hadn't used one in 70 years, but he liked to get it out of his satchel and display it, as it always was an easy conversation starter for subjects he would interview. It was going to be a momentous day. The introduction of the Battle Stadium, as it was being called. For Holly and Daryl, it was going to be a day in infamy for a different reason. They were going to commit murder. Justified? Maybe? It was time. Holly and Daryl entered the media area to many handshakes and hellos. The familiar surroundings of a media room were soothing to them. It helped them ease their nerves. They made sure to speak to many of the other reporters there. They were all basically members of the new global news. It was an online newspaper that automatically loaded to every device in the world at noon and midnight. 2 editions. It basically was propaganda. They spoke to other members of the media. This way, there were no suspicions regarding why Holly was suddenly there. As the press conference was beginning, members of the media moved to the cordoned area especially for them. Alejandro and Faulkner were sitting on the stage in the middle of the stadium, and there were several other minions of Faulkner's on the stage as well. Holly thought back to when she was of those minions. How could she have been so dumb? Faulkner spotted Holly and nodded, and Holly gave a sheepish wave. Faulkner then leaned to Alejandro and whispered something. Alejandro then spoke to one of the security members, and that person walked down to the media area and approached Holly. Holly began to panic. The guard though merely said to her, "Mr. Faulkner would like you to join him on stage." Holly was shocked. This was going to a murder that all the world will witness. As Holly turned to tell Daryl about the summons, he was gone. Daryl had slipped away to the back of the stage and into a private room. He told security that he had a private meeting scheduled for Alejandro. "You aren't on today's scheduled agenda," the guard said. Daryl scoffed, "You want to go ask him while he is on stage." The guard drew in a big breath of disgust. The press conference began, and as the new order of speaking was being displayed with Alejandro speaking and then a couple of the Gastown City Council members, finally Faulkner spoke. He announced the usefulness of the stadium. It was part of the effort to solve hunger problems. The prisoners would eliminate each other, and feeding would be reserved for champions. The others would receive protein tablets and water. Holly was shocked, again, at what she was hearing Faulkner say. The stadium was nearly full. There were cheers and occasional standing ovations as Faulkner spoke. Meanwhile, Daryl lurked inside the dressing room of Alejandro. The door opened and Alejandro immediately said, "Mr. Evans." Daryl was surprised as Alejandro hadn't even glanced his way. "What?" Daryl uttered. "Do what you came to do." "Mr. Evans," Alejandro said. Daryl didn't even hesitate. He had no interest in engaging in conversation with Alejandro. He stood and drew the massive revolver from his satchel. Alejandro smiled. Daryl calmly fired the gun. The silencer muffled the shot enough that with all the cheering in the stadium the shot could barely be heard. Alejandro didn't flinch. He merely stared into Daryl's eyes as if completely disinterested. "What the?" Daryl uttered. He turned the gun as if to see if it had fired. He could smell the gunpowder. How could he have missed? Alejandro smiled. "Oh, Mr. Evans." The gun fired again. Blood spewed against the wall as flesh and brains splattered onto the wall. Daryl's eyes bulged as he fell to his knees and collapsed on the floor dead. Chapter 27. Holly finishes Faulkner, doesn't she? As Daryl lay dead in Alejandro's dressing room, Holly was listening to the end of Faulkner's speech. The crowd was growing to a frenzy. It was loud and most of the people were on their feet. Holly joined them in the ovation only when she reached inside her purse and grabbed the knife she had made with Daryl. As Faulkner stepped back from the podium, Holly stepped toward Faulkner and in one move sliced Faulkner's neck. Faulkner grabbed at his throat. The blood shot between his fingers. He turned and looked at Holly with surprise. The crowd continued to cheer. They came for blood and savageness, and they were getting it. A shot rang out and Holly fell on top of the body of Faulkner. She died instantly. Faulkner bled out and chaos ensued. People were fighting in the stands. People were being trampled. Guards were firing at will. People were dropping everywhere. Alejandro emerged back on stage and began to yell into the microphone. He demanded order and slowly the stadium began to grow silent. "Everyone, calm down," Alejandro screamed into the microphone, and as he pointed across the crowd almost magically a hush fell upon all the people. "This is only to show the greatness of Andrew Faulkner. You all saw him die, but I tell you today, he will live again in 3 days. For Andrew Faulkner is the great 1 inch," he concluded. He then turned and kicked the body of Holly off Faulkner to a huge cheer from the crowd. There was confusion as people were told to leave the stadium. "I want you all to come back in 3 days for a celebration of life of Andrew Faulkner. A camera will remain on the great one as he lay here so you all will know. Until then, God save the Savior," Alejandro said. The press conference was over, but it was only the beginning. Chapter 28. The Rise of the Antichrist. For 3 days both hemisphere-wide television networks were fixed on the dead body of Andrew Faulkner. Faulkner's body lay on the stage in the stadium. His neck slashed from ear to ear. Holly May had executed the assassination perfectly. Both Holly May and Daryl Evans knew the chances of coming out alive of their mission would certainly lead to death. It did. For 3 days the chaos only doubled, maybe tripled as Faulkner lay dead and the television network broadcast exactly what Luke wanted as Alejandro instructed. In the top right-hand corner of the screen was the lifeless body of Faulkner. The rest of the screen was a constant loop of Faulkner biographies. They all culminated with the slashing of Faulkner's neck and Alejandro's claim that in 3 days Faulkner would rise from the grave just as Jesus Christ had done some 2,000 years earlier. Alejandro and Luke met in a private location. They were discussing the events of the day before where Holly May had executed Faulkner. "It is working out just as planned," Luke said with a huge smile. "I am surprised it was her. I thought they would do it the other way. It is more entertaining though having the former assistant, attractive and sexy lady being the villain. It plays out well on television." Alejandro broke into a chuckle, the look on Daryl Evans' face as he realized he couldn't kill me. "Now what do we do about this Todd Miner? He is preaching the real truth to people at the 5th Street Commons. They may cast this Holly May as some kind of martyr. It could be bad for business." Luke calmly looked at Alejandro. "It is under control. Raul, Muhammad and Spike are currently eliminating those pests of the 5th Street Commons. It will be handled." Alejandro nodded and smiled. "Well done, father, well done." Ford Weaver and his wife Lois lived virtually off the grid. They had a 2-story house in a small little burg called Lapel between Gastown and Indianapolis. The congregants of the 5th Street Commons were now enemies of the global empire. They were meeting at Ford and Lois's place. Lois had killed and plucked a chicken earlier in the day and fried it up and added some beans and potatoes from the garden. The remaining members from the 5th Street Commons sat around the table discussing and feasting. Pastor Todd blessed the food and opened the meeting. "I think I can say I was as shocked as anyone to see Holly step up from behind Faulkner and slit his throat." Lloyd Melvin spoke next. "What about what Alejandro said? That raise from the dead stuff? You think it is real?" Lois intervened. "It can't be real, can it?" Ford decided to answer, "No way." Everyone at the table turned and looked at Pastor Todd. He calmly spoke, "I am afraid that Alejandro is right. Following the teachings of the Book of Revelation, I believe Faulkner to be the Antichrist." They all began to talk over each other and murmur and speak in shock as Pastor Todd hushed them. Suddenly, the house shook, and a shadow fell over the table. Ruth LaValle stood and pointed as Lois yelled, "What on God's green earth?" Raul was standing in the dining room. His 7-foot 6-inch frame was terrible, intimidating, but not nearly as scary as the 8-foot and 1-inch Spike who emerged on the other side. Muhammad was suddenly standing on the kitchen table. Ford stood and yelled, "Get the heck off my table." In one motion, Raul shoved his 12-inch fingernails into the back of Ford and sliced in half. Screams filled the house and Pastor Todd yelled even louder, "In the holy name of Jesus Christ we demand that you leave these premises." Holy God of the earth and sky, when he was interrupted by a vicious slap from the back of the hand of Muhammad and caused Pastor Todd to sail across the room and slam into the wall of the kitchen and slide down the wall. The Archangel Michael appeared and thrust the sword of God into the stomach of Muhammad. Muhammad disintegrated into nothing more than dust. Spike thrust a knife towards Michael and his grimy hand was stopped. His wrist snapped and the knife clanged to the ground. Elisha appeared behind Spike and with a wipe of his hand Spike blew upward and came down on a scepter held by Elisha. His body evaporated. Michael then turned to Raul and spoke, "You go back and tell Luke that you or your type are not welcome here. These people are protected by the Lord Almighty." Elisha then took the 2 pieces of Ford and placed them back together. Ford's eyes opened. The others were left stunned. Michael spoke and it sounded as if there were thousands. "You shall not remember this." At that Michael and Elisha whooshed away as quickly as they appeared. Pastor Todd then spoke, "I am afraid that Alejandro is right. Following the teachings of the Book of Revelation, I believe Faulkner is the Antichrist." Chapter 29, The Fake Resurrection, Revelation 13. On the 3rd day, Lucifer entered the body of Andrew Faulkner as he lay on the stage where he had been slain by Holly May. As Lucifer entered Faulkner, Faulkner's body shook and bounced on the stage until his eyes opened and he stood. His eyes shone a bright red. Though still handsome, there was a terror that emanated from his eyes. The crowd began to swell to a fury of cheers and ovation. Faulkner stood to the microphone. "It is as I said." More cheers and complete excitement. "Today, I rule the world. Today the global army shall march on Israel and end the very thought of that fake God who reigns." A week later the Euphrates had dried up and the 10 million strong army of globalists under the direction of Alejandro were marching on Israel. They already controlled most of Europe by dominance and they controlled the rest by fear. Israel was holding out, but it was under a direct attack. As the soldiers paraded through the muddy bed of the once powerful Euphrates, all eyes were trained on the Hemisphere television network. As the soldiers were arriving on the banks, a loud trumpet blared. The soldiers quickly averted their eyes to the sky. Chapter 30, Christ and his army returned to the earth on the Mount of Olives, Revelation 19. The clouds began to part, and Jesus Christ appeared to the awe of the soldiers and the rest of the people who had been glued to the television. Christ was riding on a white horse with a legion of angels led by Michael and the saints that had already gone to be with the Lord led by John the Baptist. The sight was one for the ages, literally. When Christ stepped on the Mount of Olives, a sword came out of his mouth that was 20 miles long. The sword was the Word of God, Hebrews 4 verse 12. As the 200 million soldiers in the army of the Antichrist watched Christ in horror, the sword swept over the land and decapitated all 200 million soldiers. The blood and floating flesh were 6 feet deep, as far as the eye could see. To clean up the carnage, Christ ordered the ravens of the earth to come and gorge on the flesh and blood of the soldiers. The eyes of Christ now glared at 4 beings: Satan, the Antichrist, the false prophet, and thousands of demons. The voice of Christ sounded like thunder and rushing water. Christ looked at them and shouted, "Time is no more. Your eternal punishment begins now." Chapter 31, Satan, Hell and the Bottomless Pit, Matthew 13 verses 41 to 42. Christ raised up Satan, the false prophet, and thousands of demons 1,000 feet into the air. He sent them flying over the Atlantic Ocean 7,000 miles to Gastown, Indiana. They flew at 700 miles per hour. The sonic booms were overwhelming. When Christ and Satan's demons arrived over the baseball stadium in Gastown, Indiana, the reservoir around the stadium drained. All that was left was dry, cracked desert land. In the dry and crusty land, Christ created 2 giant holes that were 500 feet in diameter each. The first hole was the opening to hell. It smelled like sulfur and the flames went 500 feet in the air. Christ looked at the Antichrist and false prophet. Christ said to them, "I knew you not. Depart from me, you evildoers." Matthew 7 verse 23. Christ threw them into hell. It was torture to listen to their screams. Christ looked at Satan and his demons with a fiery glare. The blood drained from Satan's face. Christ repeated what he said on the cross. "It is finished." Christ bound all of them in chains and threw them into the second hole. The second hole had no flames. It was the bottomless pit. It was adjacent to the opening for hell. As Satan and his demons plunged into the bottomless pit, their screams and hisses were hideous. It sounded like a million fingernails on a chalkboard. When the last demon plunged into the bottomless pit, one of Christ's angels sealed the opening and locked it. Satan and his demons were bound in the bottomless pit for 1,000 years. Chapter 32, the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth begins. For the next 75 days, the followers of Christ and his angels rebuilt temples, churches, and synagogues all over the globe. Anxiety, anger, and fear were replaced by forgiveness, love, and joy. For the next 1,000 years Christ ruled the earth and people were filled with joy, wisdom, and contentment. The whole earth was filled with the knowledge of the Lord. Wolves, lambs, serpents, and infants walked side by side in peace. The animals neither struck nor killed on Christ's holy mountain, Isaiah 11. The saints of Christ served as governors, senators, and judges throughout the earth. Those born on the earth during this time were still born with corruptible flesh. However, most people still lived beyond age 100. Chapter 33, Satan and the demons are temporarily released from the bottomless pit. When the 1,000 years was complete, Christ reopened the bottomless pit in Gastown, Indiana. Satan and his demons had one last chance to deceive the nations. They flew out of the pit like a swarm of bees. The saints looked puzzled at this event. No one understood why Christ allowed this temporary deceit to happen once again. Some speculated that it was to prove once and for all that the human heart was deceitful and prone to Satan's temptations. Regardless of the reason, Satan's opportunity to deceive the world only lasted a few minutes. Christ opened the gates of hell and flushed Satan and his demons into it. Their screams sounded like 1,000 jet engines going 500 miles per hour past your face. Satan and his demons were cast forever into the lake of fire. However, the gates of hell were still open. There was one more thing for the angels of Christ to cast into hell. People who never accepted Christ as their Lord and Savior. Everyone whose name was not found in the Lamb's Book of Life, Revelation 20 verse 15. This was known as the second death, Revelation 21 verse 8. It was time for the Great White Throne Judgment. Chapter 34, the Great White Throne Judgment. Revelation 20, Matthew 13 verses 41 to 42, Mark 8 verses 36 to 38. Finally, the book of life was opened, and the day of judgment began. God himself sat on the throne with Christ at his right hand. Billions of souls who never accepted Christ as Lord and Savior stood before the Lord. None of their names were found in the Lamb's Book of Life. The voice of Christ echoed like thunder before the billions of souls in the dark room. The following 3 verses were the last words they heard before they were thrown into hell by the angels of Christ. Matthew 7 verse 23. Jesus said, "I will say to those on my left, I never knew you. Depart from me, you evildoers." Matthew 13 verses 41 to 42. The Son of Man will send out his angels to weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Revelation 20 verse 15. Everyone whose name was not found in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. Upon the conclusion of these words, the angels of Christ were released to seize the billions of souls in the room. 2 angels grabbed each person by the arms and flew them through the air. When the angels flew over the opening of hell, the angels threw each soul into the flames like a bale of hay. Each soul had no one to blame but themselves. They refused the gift of salvation from Christ in order to enjoy the temporary lusts and trappings of this world. There were no more second chances. It was finished. Mark 8 verses 36 to 38. 36 For what shall it profit a man, if he shall gain the whole world, and lose his own soul? 37 Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? 38 Whosoever therefore shall be ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him also shall the Son of Man be ashamed, when he cometh in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. Chapter 35, The earth was clean. Time for the New Jerusalem. The New Jerusalem as assembled by Christ was a massive structure, 1,500 miles wide, tall, and deep. It came down from heaven and settled majestically on the earth. The distance of 1,500 miles was the distance from Cincinnati, Ohio to Phoenix, Arizona. The square footage on the first floor was more than 62 trillion square feet. You could put all 8 billion people on Earth on the first floor, and everyone would have a 7,840 square foot apartment. The New Jerusalem was so tall, you could put the tallest building in the world on top of itself almost 3,000 times. The New Jerusalem was the capital city of heaven. There was more to heaven than just the New Jerusalem. There were no more limitations of the human body. As the Bible said in Isaiah 40 verse 31, everyone who waited on the Lord rose with the wings like eagles. They ran and did not grow weary. They walked without fainting. They ate all they wanted. It was the perfect place of harmony, and all worked to keep it that way. There was no more conflict, only joy. Just as promised in the 14th chapter of the book of John, everyone had their own mansion made of gold. It was a brilliant place of life. As Christ had said, if it were not true, I would have told you so. To God be the glory forever, Selah.